So we've learned in the Mishnah of Nedarim that a neder prohibits an object from a person. So in other words, this loaf of bread might be forbidden to me. I might take an oath that I can't, that this loaf of bread is forbidden to me. And a shavua, an oath, actually prohibits a person from taking an action. So in other words, I won't pick up that loaf of bread. And we learned that, generally speaking, the normal language for a neder, that a prohibition from taking an object, is to say something like, it shall be for me like a consecrated object. For example, let's say the loaf of bread was a korban on the altar. Well, you couldn't eat it because it's a korban on the altar. So you might say, well, I swear that this loaf will be for me like a korban. But for some reason, perhaps because the sages, one reason adduced by Kahati is that the sages didn't want you to take the name of God in vain. Well, we know that, but they don't like you, therefore, throwing names of sacrifices around. So the Mishnah begins by saying, Kinuye Nedarim, ki Nedarim. A nickname for a vow is like a vow. And a nickname for a cherem is like a cherem, and so on. So, for example, we learned that instead of korban, ha'omer kunam, or kunach, or kunas, hare elu kinuyim lekorban. You can say konam, or konach, or konas, and these are nicknames for korban. So we don't have to say it's like a korban, we can say it's like a kunam. And there are various other nicknames we learned. But the Mishnah then goes on to say other sorts of kind of language which we can use, which implies something is like a korban, but without using the nickname. So we might use, I think in English we call it a circumlocution. A circumlocution, a roundabout way of saying it. So we're not going to say it's a korban, but we're going to allude to that. So let's look at the Mishnah. Lo chulim, lo chalach. I shall not eat something, I shall not eat from you, as if your food is not chulin. Well, chulin is ordinary, non-consecrated food. Not chulin, lo chulin, that must mean it's holy food, like a korban. Lo chulin, not ordinary, means consecrated. What about lo kasher? Or what about lo kasher, the lo dechi, not kasher or not pure? So not kasher actually means, means that's, so lo kasher, the lo dechi, tahor. So here we're getting into other kinds of circumlocutions. And if it's kasher, then if it's kasher, again, it's ready to be eaten. But lo kasher sounds like it's you can't eat it. But the implication here is not that it's treif. The implication is not that it's treif. The implication is that it's somehow concentrated. Lo dechi, not pure. That means not pure for me. Not pure for me, but it should be pure to go on the altar. Tahor, well, this is tahor to go on the altar. Tameh, unclean. This is unclean for me, but therefore pure to go on the altar. Notaru pigul, remnant or pigul, these are remnants of sacrifices which are clearly holy and can't be eaten. And in all of these cases, the Mishnah rules asur. He's forbidden, he's bound by this vow, i.e., he's made a valid vow. If he uses any of these circumlocutions, it's as if he said korban. And we could use other kinds of circumlocutions for korban. So we could say ke'imra, as a lamb. This refers to the daily sacrifice. Kedarayim, The diraim are the temple pens where they used to keep the animal. Ha'etzim, like the wood. This is the wood that we used to go on the altar. K'ishim, well, okay, this is the fires on the altar. Kamizbeach, this is as the altar, i.e. as something on the altar. Kahechal, as the temple. Kirushalayim, these all refer to things which are brought on in the temple or in Jerusalem. So in other words, if I say, oh yeah, this loaf will be like Kahechal or Kirushalayim, this loaf will be like the altar or like the temple. I'm saying this loaf is essentially, I'm going to treat this loaf as if it's a holy object. Now, if he said anything like this, Nadab echad mikol mishamsheh hamizbeach, maybe he swore by any of the tools of the utensils of the altar. Afal pi shelo hiskir korban harezeh nadar b'korban. Even though he didn't actually use the word korban, he's actually sworn by korban. He's created a neder using the word korban. Even though he hasn't used the word korban, he's sort of alluded to it in one of these circumlocutions. Rabbi Yehuda Omer HaOmer Yerushalayim Lo Amar Klom. Rabbi Yehuda says, he who says Jerusalem has said nothing, because of course Jerusalem's a big city, and lots of things go on in Jerusalem, not just related to the temple. Maybe he's just referring to the sticks and stones or open spaces of Jerusalem. And the halacha doesn't go according to Rabbi Yehuda, but it records Rabbi Yehuda's disagreement. And similarly, you don't have to just use the word korban. HaOmer korban olah. You can say olah, which is a olah offering, a burnt offering. Umincha, a meal offering. Chatat, a sin offering. Todah, a thanksgiving offering. Ushlamim, a peace offering. She'eni ochel lach, that I should not eat from you. I should not eat from you like any of these offerings. Asur, the Mishnah rules. He is bound. In other words, this is a valid. You don't have to use the word korban. You can use any kind of sacrifice, as long as you can use any sacrifice. Rabbi Yehuda matir, interestingly, Rabbi Yehuda permits. Rabbi Yehuda seems to want just the language korban. And then you could say ha-korban, korban she'ochalach asur. You could say the korban, like a korban. Korban, that I eat from yours, that you're bound. If he says, lo korban, lo ochal, lo korban, lo ochalach, I shall not eat from yours something that should not be a korban. Rabbi Meir binds him. I'm not sure why Rabbi Meir binds him, because this seems the opposite way around. He's saying it's not a korban. HaOmer lechavaro kunam pi medaber imach. If one says to his fellow, kunam, remember kunam is one of the nicknames for korban. If someone says to his fellow, kunam, that's a nickname for korban, pi medaber imach. A korban be my mouth which speaks with you. Vidai or saima, or my hands which work for you. Viraglim halechet lach, or my feet which walk with you. He's bound. Remember, we said that a neder has to be made on an object, not on an action. So he couldn't make a neder to stop himself speaking, but if he makes the neder on his mouth, or on his hands, or on his feet, then that's considered a valid form of neder because it's made on an object, just like the loaf of bread. In this case, he's actually making the neder on an object which is part of his own body. But you can, clearly, from the language of the Mishnah, you can make a neder on something which is part of your own body. And that is actually the close of the first chapter of the Mishnah, which is all about legitimate expressions of Nedarim. And then the next chapter is all about the opposite, illegitimate expressions of Nedarim which don't work. And so as we go through the next chapter, having looked at some expressions which do work, we're going to look at some that do not.